Imagine if you were able to trade away guys like J.K. Dobbins, Ramondre Stevenson when they're at the peak of their powers in fantasy, but now they're not. Well, that's what this video is all about, trying to find the trade away players that you need to be getting off of your team, and there's 10 of them in this video, and send them over to your friends roster before week 5 begins. And we'll begin with Jordan Addison, the Minnesota Vikings wide receiver who returned in week 4 from an injury, and he ended up playing pretty well. Now, if we want to see his usage, he runs 85% of the routes in week 4, according to Fantasy Life's data. Now, this is very good. This means that his left ankle injury that he was dealing with, he also had a right high ankle sprain that he got in the preseason. It looks like he's back to being fully healthy because on the 85% of the snaps or the 85% of the routes, there was no re-injury. He ends up seeing 12% of the targets. Okay, that's not a great number overall, and more on that in a second. Addison ended up putting up a big day here, and this is why he's a trade away. 23 fantasy points. He scores 2 times, but one of those touchdowns was a big touchdown downfield against the Packers' backup cornerbacks. The other one was, a rushing touchdown. This kind of reminds me of Xavier Worthy in week 1. Remember Xavier Worthy on Thursday Night Football had a rushing touchdown, had a receiving touchdown on somewhat of a broken play, only has 3 targets, but he has 20 points. Like, you can't sustain that, and we've seen that with Worthy now, in week 2 and 3. Okay, so the 12% target share and 4 targets. Yes, the Vikings didn't throw a lot in the second half and in the second quarter as much because they were up by 28 points pretty early on in this game, but still a 12% target share is rather low. But it was his first game back from injury, so we give him some benefit of the doubt. But also we have to point out that Jair Alexander was inactive, the Packers' #1 cornerback. So the Packers were actually without their top 2 cornerbacks in this game overall, which is another reason why the big touchdown that you see from Jordan Addison that he often did last year, 10 touchdowns, and 3 of those last year were on broken plays. This one wasn't a broken play, but again, backup cornerbacks in there running right by them. Probably doesn't happen with a guy like Jair. Addison ended up ranking 3rd on the team in targets behind the running back Aaron Jones, who's been highly involved, much more involved than the running backs last year for the Vikings were in the receiving game. So that's something to point out as well for target shares moving forward for Addison. Justin Jefferson, Jalen Nager stays involved. You can see a lot of guys in general were involved here. 27 overall targets to go around, just 4 go to Jordan Addison in this game. And again, look, this was the problem with Addison. He's not the speediest of wide receivers, so those deep plays, you're not really going to see him winning all that much or consistently in that regard in terms of running by guys. Yeah, sure, he can win in terms of route running, but this is a guy last year who was propelled up by some touchdowns, and now he's coming off of a couple injuries. And look, I admit it, I thought he was a great leverage play if you played DFS this past week. Jordan Addison is somebody coming back that had no ownership, but if we're talking about rest of season, I wouldn't be shocked if this 20-point performance scoring 2 touchdowns is his best performance because he's known for these spike weeks and then somewhat disappearing, and that's just going to happen when you're playing next to Justin Jefferson, even in this quality Kevin O'Connell offense. And here's where things really get worse for Addison, or will in a few weeks. You can see Adam Schefter talks about TJ Hockenson. He's coming back off of his major knee injury. They opened up the 21-day window for TJ Hockenson. So this means within the next 2 to 3 weeks, TJ Hockenson will be back on the field. Now, that doesn't mean that he's immediately going to be back and running 100% of the routes, but he'll be pretty close. So right now is the time to sell Jordan Addison before he falls back down to earth in the fantasy production, before TJ Hockenson comes back, and also before his brutal week 5 matchup. Because, oh, beautiful people, this dude is facing the Jets. He goes from the Packers, who had both their starting cornerbacks out, to facing the Jets. Sure, he's at home, but the Jets right now, the #1 secondary in the NFL. The Jets are currently allowing the fewest fantasy points per receiving play. So if I pull up my trades tool, my rest of season rankings, Jordan Addison is my 86th overall player, meaning anybody above him I would rather have 1-for-1. So we're talking Devin Singletary, much rather have 1-for-1. Ladd McConkey, much rather have 1-for-1 if you can get that done. Rome Odunze off a bad week is the perfect guy to be trying to buy low on. Tony Pollard off a nice week. I don't know if you can get that done, but based on the big week that you just had out of Devin Singletary and the fact now, or you had out of Jordan Addison, and the fact now that guys like Tony Pollard and Ladd McConkey enter their bye week, that can be an opportunity to go trade for those guys, maybe get a discount, try and trade away Jordan Addison before he, gets 3 catches for 40 yards in his next game. And this one might seem a little bit obvious. He's been in this video 2 times, I believe. DeAndre Swift is somebody who finally had a good game. Everybody was a week late. It was a massive one, and odds are he was probably on your bench, and now you're punching the air because you just can't get the DeAndre Swift decisions right, and this has basically been this guy for the majority of his career. What makes it even more frustrating, and the reason why he might have been on your bench even more for people, is because reportedly ESPN insider Jeremy Fowler said the Bears plan on giving Roschon Johnson an extended look in Sunday's game against the Rams. Now, I was a little bit skeptical of this report because I didn't see them tag Jeremy Fowler. I didn't see anywhere else outside of this Bears season account end up tweeting this out, but this picked up a lot of steam. 4.2 million views. It went viral in the fantasy space, the betting space, all of these things. And did it pan out? No, I don't think so. I think maybe even somebody planted that to try and get a nice bet, a lower line on DeAndre Swift, honestly. Because in week 4, no, instead of Roschon Johnson seeing a featured look, well, no, DeAndre Swift played a season high 67% of the snaps. He ended up seeing 57% of the rush attempts in this game. And when you take out his quarterback carries, he saw 70% of the backfield carries, which again was a season high in this one. Oh, but Roschon Johnson's the pass protector and the pass catcher, so he was probably used there, right, Sal? No, it was DeAndre Swift running more than 2 times as many routes and playing in all of the obvious or the majority of the obvious passing down situations. And look, this led to a massive game overall. You can see right here, 93 yards on the ground, 72 in the air, catching all 7 of his targets, puts up 29.5 fantasy points after scoring the touchdown. Again, depending on your league formats, of course, PPR versus half PPR. But here's the thing about this. This was a very unique game because the Rams' best overall spot on their defense right now is their pass rush. Their run defense stinks and their secondary stinks. And if you watch this game, you know that Caleb Williams had 0 time to throw the ball. None at all. Look at this right here. Yes, Caleb Williams completes 17 of 23 passes, so that doesn't look terrible, but this is why he completes 17 of 23 passes. Let's see who is actually catching those passes. Oh, DeAndre Swift, the running back, for 7. Oh, Cole Kmet, a tight end, for 3. Their wide receivers, their top wide receiver, DJ Moore, in this game had just 22 yards. Keenan Allen with 19. Rome Odunze with 10. What does this tell you? It tells you that Caleb Williams was so much under pressure that he was just checking it down quickly because he had to get the ball out. His wide receivers couldn't develop in their routes downfield, which is exactly why you see somebody like DeAndre Swift go out there, see 7 targets, catch them all. These games are not going to happen moving forward. Yes, the Bears' offensive line stinks. They're not going to face a borderline top 10 pass rush led by Colby Turner that played out of their minds in week 4 at home for the Rams. I don't think that's going to happen every single week. I think there's going to be at least more time moving forward, definitely more than they had in week 4 for Caleb Williams to find players downfield. And that's going to start this week because they face the Carolina Panthers, who according to PFF have the 31st ranked pass rush, second to last in the NFL, only behind the Bengals, and the Bengals are dealing with a lot of injuries. The Panthers entered the year with a bad pass rush. They lost one of their best, probably their best overall player on defense after week 1. So this is a very, very bad secondary. And not only that, not only do they currently rank 31st in the NFL in pass rush, they allow the 6th most passing yard and receiving yards per play. So this could be a week for the wide receivers to get going in Chicago. Because in my opinion, all of this production from DeAndre Swift last year was completely just fraudulent, right? He's still playing behind the 26th ranked offensive line in the NFL. Him going for 5.8 yards per carry. A lot of it coming on a 36-yard long run against the Rams, who allow the most rushing yards in the NFL. I think the matchup might have had something to do with that. I think the fact that the Bears offensive line couldn't pass protect in this game probably had something to do with those checkdowns. This smells really bad and fishy. DeAndre Swift is just my 95th overall player the rest of the season right now, meaning like I'd rather sell him right now and just wait on Isaiah Pacheco for another month if your team's in a position to do so. I'd much rather just have and wait on another 2 to 3 weeks Jonathan Brooks to get ramped up, right? All these other guys we talked about earlier. Heck, the way that Tank Dell is performing and now he's out for week 4, Tank Dell was, maybe you can buy low on Tank Dell, buy low on Amari Cooper off a bad week. If you can swap just for Ramondre or even a Rashid Shaheed, I would much rather do that. My God, 4 in the morning, the man can't talk. Now that tool I was just using, I referenced it earlier. It is my rest of season rankings. It could also be called the trade analyzer tool, and that is a part of my fantasy blueprint, just one of the tools that you get sent to you weekly. Now to get access to your fantasy blueprint with 20,000 other people you can see right here, you just follow these 2 simple steps linked down below. You follow those, you sign up through one of our partners, and here's the deal. When you sign up through one of our partners, all the steps will be down below, very simple for you. This blueprint becomes risk-free through one of our 2 partners. Now what does risk-free mean, Sal? Well, it's a one-time payment of just $10 for the entire year. You get the tools throughout the entire fantasy playoffs all year long. And if you don't make your playoffs, though, you get that $10 right back when you sign up through one of our partners. Which, as you can see right here, again, this means that it is completely risk-free. So if you want to get access to your blueprint today, the tools that I use for all my fantasy leagues and that 20,000 people are currently using for theirs, you can click the link in the description below or that QR code that's been on the screen. You can just scan that with your lovely telephone and go get access to schmack around your league mates. Not now. No. But right now, the next man up in this video is going to be Michael Pittman, who we told you to sell after week 1 because he was not a good fit for this Anthony Richardson offense. And you can see that in week 2 and week 3, he had terrible games. But then in week 4, he finally has a big day. But oh no, he didn't do it with Anthony Richardson. A lot of it, most of it, far majority of it came off the back of the veteran Joe Flacco. Because on the second offensive drive in this game, Joe Flacco came in against a tough Pittsburgh Steelers team. And what does he do? He completes 62% of his passes, cold off the bench, 168 yards, 2 touchdowns. He actually looks pretty good out there overall. And that ends up sustaining the best yardage day we've seen this season and dating back to last season, a far time now for Michael Pittman. Pittman sees 9 targets, which was the co-lead with Josh Downs in this game. He ends up catching 6 balls, 13 yards, goes over 100 yards, again, in a tough matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So in general, this should be an encouraging sign if you were able to keep him on your team and you didn't trade him after week 1, although since then he's really hurt you. But in week 4, all the Colts playmakers were getting there. We saw Jonathan Taylor on the ground. We saw Josh Downs and Michael Pittman both have 20-plus point fantasy days. It would all be so great if it wasn't for the fact that they were doing this with Joe Flacco, who moving forward isn't going to be the quarterback maybe as soon as this week. Because as you can see right here, Anthony Richardson is expected to miss very little or no game action. Apparently he's trending to play right now in week 5. Again, by the time you're watching this, maybe that has changed, but even if he misses 1 week, it'll be Joe Flacco for 1 week, and then maybe it comes back down to earth once Richardson comes back in for Pittman, because again, Pittman is not a good fit for this offense. And it pains me to say this, but Anthony Richardson is just not hitting the short to intermediate throws consistently. He's not. He has no timing ability right now. He's a raw, inexperienced quarterback who barely had any college starts, and as of right now, he ranks dead last in the NFL, completing just 50% of his passes. And Pittman, like we saw in week 4 at times with Joe Flacco, is winning the most in the short to intermediate ranges on in-breaking routes, those timing routes. Not there right now for Anthony Richardson's skill set to consistently hit him on those. But it's not just Michael Pittman who gets hurt from this. It's also guys like Josh Downs, although you could have picked him up on your waiver wire. Obviously, Alec Pierce and Adonai Mitchell are just, that's another guy, Alec Pierce, if you were able to pick up and trade him after week 1 or week 2 watching these videos, he's just an absolute ball of dust right now. But all these guys, they're not benefiting from the inaccuracy of Anthony Richardson, but they're also not benefiting because Anthony Richardson, of course, his biggest strength maybe is his mobility, his elite athleticism and mobility. That's going to take away touchdown upsides in the red zone for these receivers as well. So now maybe we get Flacco this week on the road against the Jaguars who allow the 3rd most passing yards per play. So this is a great matchup. Don't get me wrong. This is a great matchup for the Colts. It's a great matchup for Pittman, Josh Downs, whoever starts at the running back position. It's a fine spot as well. But I rather sell high on Pittman. I'd rather sell high on Pittman than take the risk that Anthony Richardson comes back in week 5, continues to look inaccurate. I don't think he's all of a sudden going to finish his years of inaccuracy in just 4 or 5 days while being injured. I don't think that's going to go away. So for me, Michael Pittman is my 66th overall player in our trades tool. Again, you can get it in the fantasy blueprint linked down below. I'd rather have anybody above him. George Kittle, if you can make it work, probably not. Definitely Brian Thomas before he plays the Colts this week. David Montgomery might be a steep spot. Here's a really good one. Buy low on Jackson Smith-Njigba, 1-for-1 for Michael Pittman. I think you can get that done today. Buy low on T. Higgins, 1-for-1 for Michael Pittman. I think you might be able to get that one done today. Buy low on Jalen Waddle before Tua comes back. I think you can definitely get that one done today. So I'm trading away Michael Pittman before he faces the Jaguars in week 5. And speaking of the Jaguars, come on down, Mr. Christian Kirk, who I have a lot of my fantasy teams right now. He was like a 7th or 8th round fantasy pick, maybe a 6th round pick, depending on your league size this summer. And back in week 3, we finally saw him getting going. Like before week 4, we got to see Christian Kirk get going, and here's what he did. He earned a team high 10 targets after weeks 1 and week 2 basically being a non-factor in this offense. Team high 10 targets, team high 8 catches, has 79 yards against the Buffalo Bills, which at that time was not an easy matchup, definitely not in the secondary. 16 fantasy points in this game, and he looks good. Finally, we got a usable week, and then he backed this up again this past week in week 4 with a nice game against the Texans. Because Kirk once again led the Jaguars with 12 targets in this game. He catches 7 of them for 61 yards, scores a touchdown, has 19 fantasy points. This is, mind you, in a game where Trevor Lawrence continued to struggle, maybe one of the worst games of his career. Trevor Lawrence now on the season ranks 2nd worst in the NFL, only ahead of Anthony Richardson, who we just discussed, in completion percentage. So all the Jaguars receivers are dealing with like the worst quarterback right now that you can deal with in the NFL in Trevor Lawrence, and yet Christian Kirk these past 2 weeks, and even Brian Thomas to an extent, like we talked about in a previous video, they are able to produce. So now through the past 2 games, Christian Kirk has led the Jaguars with 22 targets and 44% of the team's air yards. That's a strong roll. And now this week he faces the Colts at home, and he's a favorite. The Jaguars are expected to get right. The Colts the past 2 weeks have allowed 300-yard passers to guys like Caleb Williams, who that offense is clearly struggling since that game, and Justin Fields, who has not been known to be a passer. He threw for over 300 yards, giving George Pickens an 119-yard game last week. In fact, the Colts this season are allowing exactly 100 yards per game to opposing number 1 outside receivers. But that's the key here, outside receivers. Because in theory, you might be saying, oh, so Christian Kirk's going to have a big game. And he might. The Colts secondary in general isn't great, but they really struggle on the outside, not as much in the slot. They actually have a solid slot wide receiver or slot cornerback. This is where they're going to struggle against Brian Thomas, a big athletic wide receiver like a George Pickens, like a Nico Collins back in week 1, like a Roma Dunze back in week 3. These are the guys who all put up over 100 yards, the profile of a Brian Thomas. I think he's a must start this week. I don't think you're going to be getting that must start situation from Christian Kirk. Can he still see 5, 6, 7, 8 targets? Sure, but here's the problem. Evan Ingram is starting to practice off his hamstring injury. He's doing individual drills on Wednesday. He was a limited participant in practice. He's somebody who's trending, and based on timelines for hamstring injuries, usually miss 2 games. He's trending to play this week. And if he plays this week, this is a great tight end in the middle of the field, had a big connection with Trevor Lawrence, led the entire NFL in tight end receptions and targets last year, and a lot of those were in the middle of the field where Christian Kirk works. And just a reminder, in week 1, when Evan Ingram was actually healthy before he got hurt before their week 2 game in warmups, Christian Kirk sees just 4 targets, catches just one of them for a big 30-yard game against Miami, who was struggling in their secondary at that time, 4 fantasy points. Again, this is a small 1-game sample, but even dating back to last year, you'll see all the routes against like cover 3, cover 1, all the routes that you get out there for Evan Ingram running, middle of the field. And that's exactly what we're going to get a lot of this week. A lot of even cover 2, middle of the field routes for Evan Ingram kind of soaks up some of that usage that Christian Kirk's been getting. So even after these last 2 weeks, Christian Kirk is still my 94th overall player because the offensive reports are sketchy. Brian Thomas is there and Evan Ingram is coming back. That's kind of the highlights of it. So I would definitely be trading him away for this similar range of guys. Ladd McConkey going into his bye week. That'll definitely get it done. Devin Singletary off of a bad Thursday night football game. That'll get it done. I think Roma Dunze, again, is a great option. Even Zach Moss, but I would rather try and push for guys like Tony Pollard if you can. Brian Robinson would be an awesome get, although that's probably tough at this point with how he's playing in the Commanders look. So those are some options that you can try and sell in one-for-one deals for Christian Kirk. Now, of course, there'll also be options for package deals. Now, this next guy might maybe surprise you, but maybe not. Because once again, I want to sell Chuba Hubbard, who's absolutely been killing it the last 2 weeks with his new quarterback in Andy Dalton. Back in week 3, in his first game with Andy Dalton, we see a top 5 finish, 30 fantasy points. You see his total yards, 114 on the ground, 55 in the air, nearly 170 yards, has a touchdown, 26 total touches. He took back over the backfield. Now, this was a great matchup against the Raiders. They have a bottom 5 run defense, but in week 3, he looked great with Andy Dalton's first start, and now heading into week 4, it continued, and it continued in a big way. Chuba Hubbard became even more featured, 74% of the snaps, season high, 67% of the backfield carries, basically tied for his season high he got last week with 68%, and this led to another big fantasy day. Oh boy, is Chuba Hubbard cooking, although against the Cincinnati Bengals, who arguably have the worst defensive line in football right now, so 2 really good matchups, keep that in mind. 18 carries, 4 receptions, so 22 total touches. I took his under 16.5 receiving yards. Of course, he ends up with 17. We get burnt by the hook in this one, but over 120 yards total, 25 fantasy points. Another big week for one Chuba Hubbard now, who's seen 20 plus touches in back-to-back weeks, averaging 150 yards total these past 2 games. All of this is great for Hubbard. His offensive line is awesome. Andy Dalton has looked great, sustaining drives and getting to the red zone often. And now through 4 games, Hubbard looks really efficient. He's 11th in true yards per carry, 16th in yards per touch, averaging 5.6 yards per touch. And on the season now, he's averaging nearly 18 opportunities per game. I mean, this is all borderline top 10, top 12 running back production for fantasy football. And another positive for Hubbard is that the Panthers did not plan or don't plan to activate Jonathan Brooks, the rookie running back that they took in the second round and traded up for, off the PUP list this week, which means that Jonathan Brooks isn't returning in week 5, which maybe indicates that he's not even returning in week 6 and maybe closer to week 7, but that's always kind of been the timeline. Right around week 5 to week 7, he comes back and he gets ramped up around week 8 or week 9. So you might be saying right now, Sal, all these things are positives for Chuba Hubbard. Why the heck would I be trading this guy? And honestly, that's a fair question. The simple answer is that's just the name of the game. Selling high on assets that don't have this sustainable of production. He's been a top 5 running back the past 2 weeks in great matchups, putting up 125, 130 yard games, 150 yard games, right? But do we think that's going to happen in 1 to 2 to 3 weeks when Jonathan Brooks comes back? And it will be highly likely that this second round, extremely talented player, the best running back in the NFL draft, taken in the second round, they traded 2 picks for him, that he's not going to split a backfield, right? Even if Jonathan Brooks splits 50-50 and doesn't take all the work away from Chuba Hubbard, that's a much worse outcome for Chuba Hubbard than he's currently having, where he's seeing 75% of the snaps and all of the production. The point of trying to sell these trade-away players, like we said, with guys like Ramondre Stevenson and J.K. Dobbins off of their big weeks, the production is not sustainable. And in this situation, it's obvious for Hubbard because he has another talented back coming back soon. Instead of these monster 25-point days where he's seeing 22 touches and over 120 yards, once Jonathan Brooks comes back, these 22 touches probably cut in half if you're lucky. Probably go to 10 touches. Probably go to 50 yards. And if he's not scoring a touchdown, he's getting his 6-7 fantasy points. And he's like all the other running backs in the NFL, like Emmanuel Wilson, Tajay Spears to an extent, Ty Chandler, these backup running backs who, if they don't score a touchdown, Antonio Gibson, they're really not relevant. Ramondre Stevenson is the perfect example. After the first 2 weeks, he looked like the best running back in fantasy, and look at this right now since then. Life comes at you fast in 2 weeks. Definitely under consideration that running back Antonio Gibson starts over Ramondre Stevenson in week 5, right? That's where we're at. In just 2 weeks, life hits you. And in just 2 weeks, Jonathan Brooks can be back in this offense, splitting the backfield, and Chuba Hubbard will be back on your fantasy bench. Trade him before that happens. Now, before we get to this next guy who can probably pick up off the waiver wire and trade for a decent coin back in return, 65% of you are not subscribed to this channel. Gentleman's agreement time, here we are. If you made it to this point in the video, it's a gentleman's agreement, meaning that you find this video interesting, entertaining, to find it all the way to this point, maybe helpful. Well, the goal now is just for you to hit the subscribe button. That's what you do. I give you all this information, you hit the subscribe button, and we're even. It's a gentleman's agreement. So I appreciate you all a ton. It helps the channel so much more than you know. Hit that subscribe button before you go. What are you waiting for? Now, that guy that you can pick up off the waiver wire and probably sell based off his last 2 weeks of a lot of production, and I think it's fool's gold, is one Wan'Dale Robinson, who, look, this dude, plain and simple, he's getting a lot of attention. He's getting a lot of targets lately for the Giants, so we have to talk about it. And we mentioned him in the wide receiver waiver videos as a guy that you need to be adding, and I want to add him for this exact reason. He currently ranks 5th in the NFL in targets. He has 37 targets this year, ahead of guys like DK Metcalf, Garrett Wilson, Amari Cooper, all these guys, Chris Godwin, who's having a big season. I don't think this is going to hold up for Wan'Dale Robinson, and the second that these 10 target per game performances don't hold up, well, he's done in fantasy. He's completely done. Now, the problem with that is in week 5, he might actually see another high volume game because Malik Neighbors is currently dealing with a concussion. Neighbors suffered this concussion on Thursday Night Football, as you can see right here, and the concussions on average take 8 days to come back from, according to SportsMD analysis on Twitter, so he could actually play and maybe is trending to play in week 5, and if that's the case, get rid of Wan'Dale Robinson. Not now, but right now. Because plain and simple, the role for Wan'Dale Robinson isn't good. Oh, what do you mean, Sally? Seeing 10 targets a game or 9 targets a game, whatever the exact thing is. Well, look at this right here. Please look at this, because these targets are not valuable at all. His average depth of target is just 4.7 yards downfield. Heck, this is the average depth of target of most running backs. We're talking about short targets. Just one deep target this entire season. The guy has over 35 targets, seen just one deep target downfield. He currently ranks 91st in average depth of target. This is a huge issue, and here's why. Most of Wan'Dale's targets are coming right now like at the line of scrimmage. A lot of them behind the line of scrimmage, maybe 1 or 2 yards ahead of the line of scrimmage. Like, that is not great volume for a guy who's not known as an elite athlete and producing after the catch. Which means that the moment Wan'Dale Robinson does not see his 10 to 12 target game and goes back down to 6 or 7, he's going to do nothing for you. He's going to be on your bench, and you're probably going to be dropping him. Because let's just do some simple math. On average right now, he's seeing a pitiful 5.1 yards per target. So even if he sees a big game of 10 targets, you're looking at, on average, based on his current low, 50 yards in that game. 83rd in the NFL. Let me say that again. 10 targets right now get you 50 yards out of Wan'Dale Robinson. So when he starts to get back to 5 or 6, he's a drop for you in your league. Trade him while you can. And you might be saying, oh, maybe it's just a small sample this year. No, that's why. No. This has been happening his entire career. 7.5 yards per reception this year is outside the top 90 receivers. 8.8 last year was outside the top 80. 9.9 in his rookie year was nice to see, but since then they've added outside field stretching wide receivers, and Wan'Dale's not playing on the outside. Even this number, though, is outside the top 60 wide receivers. But again, since then they have Darius Slayton back and healthy. They have obviously Malik Neighbors. They don't have a reason to put Wan'Dale on the outside. If you were to pull up my rest of season trade stool, Wan'Dale Robinson's not in it. He's not in my top 50 players the rest of the season, meaning I would much rather have any of these guys. Xavier Legette, oh my God, of course I'd rather have him. Jacoby Myers right now, definitely. Jalen Polk of the Patriots, I'd rather have over Wan'Dale Robinson, because if that thing turns around, this is for the rest of the season. This is not for week 5 rankings. Of course, Wan'Dale will be higher in week 5 rankings, but give me Pat Freiermuth over him. Like, even all these dudes I would much rather have, and I think you can get it done because you can say, Wan'Dale Robinson is top 5 in targets right now. Look at the production he just gave me last week. He caught like 11 balls and couldn't even break 80 yards, right? Go and get rid of Wan'Dale. And then sell high on Kareem Hunt, because really for the next week or two is all you have out of Kareem Hunt, if that. He had a nice week 4 for sure, but he only had it because Carson Steele fumbled in this game, the rookie for the Chiefs, which gave Kareem Hunt an expanded look. He played 43% of the snaps. Off the bench in his first game active this year, though, he's 58% of the rush attempts. So this was encouraging, and it led to a nice day. Hunt ended up turning 14 carries and 2 catches into 85 total yards between his rushing and receiving. So the dude was averaging like 6 yards per touch out there, 5.5, 6 yards per touch. But if you watch the game, you know that he really didn't look all that explosive. And heading into week 5, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is returned to practice, and he's expected to play in week 5. So this just makes things even more messy. The former first-round pick, who I believe will definitely have a role in this offense. So now you're looking at a situation where you have Clyde Edwards-Helaire, you have Samaje Perine still out there, who scored the game-winning touchdown last week. You have obviously Kareem Hunt. Carson Steele, I don't think will be a big factor, but maybe he plays a couple of snaps in the game. Maybe he plays in some short down and distance situations. The point being is this is a messy backfield. And even if Kareem Hunt's usage last week got him another week or 2 to be the starter, Isaiah Pacheco is due back in like 4 or 5 weeks. So Kareem Hunt, sell him right now. The best you get is a month out of him, and most likely you're getting a week or 2 in a messy backfield. And I also want to remind you to sell Courtland Sutton, because even though he had another solid game this past week where he saw 9 targets, another big volume game, catches 3 of them for 60 yards and a touchdown, 15 fantasy points, and a tough matchup against the Jets and a bad weather game, like all of this should be talking points, right? 2 games in a row now. 2 games in a row of solid production, but it feels really, really thin. Here's why it feels thin, beautiful people. 9 targets, only 3 catches. That's been the story of his season right now. You can see it right here. Just 44% of his targets have been catchable. 44%. So more than half of his targets are not even catchable, are pointless to be out there, because of the fact that Bo Nix does not look like a capable starting quarterback right now. Again, he's a rookie a couple games into his career. Let's give him a break, but it's not a great situation for Sutton. So according to Fantasy Life right now, Courtland Sutton has 34 targets for this team, double anybody else on the team. He's obviously by far and away their really only talented playmaker in the passing attack right now. So if you wanted to keep him on your team for that and hope Bo Nix gets better, that's fine. But I don't know how many more weeks we can sustain these awful targets coming Courtland Sutton's way. Just off of 2 good weeks, try and dish him 1-for-1 for a decent option. Go buy low on Devin Singletary. Go buy low on anybody. Ladd McConkey going into his bye week right now. So these have been the players that you should trade away before week 5. Send them off to your teammates' rosters. And the guys that you can trade them for, we mentioned some in this video, but the running back trade video and the wide receiver trade video are popping up right here. They released earlier in the week, give you all the context you need to know for the guys to be targeting. Not now, but right now. Check out those videos. They might be your favorite of all time. And remember the gentleman's agreement before you go to hit that subscribe button. I'll see you on the next one. Enjoy the weekend and enjoy the week 5 football games.